Something happens when two people who have done the real inner work finally meet each other. Not the kind of meeting where you exchange names or talk about the weather. Something deeper, something that doesn't have a clean explanation. It feels like the air changes, like the room remembers something it forgot, like you've walked into a conversation that was already happening before either of you opened your mouth. Most people brush this off. They say, "Oh, we just clicked," but that's not what this is. What this is runs much deeper than chemistry, and if you've ever experienced it, you already know what I mean. This is about what happens at the level of consciousness when two people who are genuinely awake, genuinely working on themselves from the inside out, enter the same space. It's not magic, but it's not ordinary either. There is a principle at work here that most people have never been taught, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because it doesn't just explain why certain encounters feel electric. It explains something much bigger about how reality itself is shaped by the state of the people moving through it. Stay with me. You've probably felt it. The exhaustion of being around people who drain you. Conversations that go nowhere. Relationships where you're always giving, always explaining, always trying to be understood, but somehow always leaving feeling more alone than before. And you wonder, is it me? Am I too much? Am I too deep? Do I just not fit anywhere? Here's what no one tells you. You're not broken. You haven't found the right frequency yet. Because most of the world is operating from a very different internal state than the one you're trying to build inside yourself. And when two different internal states meet, there is friction, there is noise, there is distance that no amount of good conversation can bridge. But when two people who have done real inner work meet, the opposite happens. And that is what we need to understand. What it means to be truly awake being awake doesn't mean you read the right books or follow the right teachers. It doesn't mean you meditate for an hour every morning or that you speak calmly in arguments. Those things might be part of the journey, but they are not the destination. And confusing the vehicle for the road is one of the most common mistakes people make on the path toward any kind of genuine inner clarity. Awakening is not a credential. It is not a lifestyle. It is not a personality type or a spiritual identity you put on like clothing and wear to make yourself feel distinct from the people around you. In fact, anyone who treats it that way has likely mistaken the idea of awakening for the actual thing. Being awake means you have turned the gaze inward. It means you have sat with yourself long enough, honestly enough, to see the patterns you were born into, the fears you inherited without knowing you inherited them, the masks you built in childhood to survive circumstances you had no power to change, the stories you told yourself for so long and with such repetition that you forgot entirely that they were stories. You started believing the narration was the reality. You started believing the map was the territory. And at some point, maybe through pain, maybe through loss, maybe through one quiet moment that cracked something open, you began to suspect that you had been living inside a version of yourself that was never quite true. Most people live their entire lives looking outward, at other people, at events, at circumstances. They move through the world as if reality is something that happens to them, not something that happens through them. They wait for conditions to be right. They blame the weather of their lives on forces they cannot name, cannot see, cannot reach. And there is no cruelty in this. It is simply where most of us begin. And many of us stay there because no one ever shows us another way of looking. The culture we grow up in is almost entirely organized around the outer world, around achievement, appearance, status, possession. The inner landscape is treated as either irrelevant or too dangerous to explore without a guide, so most people never go there at all. But an awakened person begins to understand something crucial. The world you experience is not separate from the world you carry inside you. This is the real shift. Not the meditation cushion, not the vocabulary, not the spiritual literature on the shelf. The shift is in understanding that what you hold inside becomes what you see outside, not as metaphor, not as poetry, but as actual mechanics. This is how consciousness works. The lens through which you look shapes what the looking reveals. If you carry unexamined grief, the world will seem to confirm loss everywhere. If you carry unconscious contempt, people will sense it before you say a single word, and will act accordingly, which will then seem to confirm your belief that people are difficult. The internal state is not passive, it is active. It is generating your experience of reality at every moment. This is a difficult truth to sit with, because it removes the comfortable position of pure victimhood. It does not mean that nothing bad happens, or that suffering is always self-created, or that the world is fair and just and only broken people experience broken things. That would be a distortion, and a cruel one. What it means is that your inner world is always participating in how your outer world appears and responds. You are never simply a neutral observer receiving an objective transmission. You are always a co-creator of the experience you are having. And once you understand this, not intellectually, but in your body, in the way you move through a day, everything changes. The way you walk into a room changes. The quality of attention you bring to a conversation changes. The kind of silence you carry, the kind of presence you hold, the way other people feel after spending time with you, all of it begins to shift because the source has shifted. You are no longer running on the programming you received before you were old enough to question it. You have gone back to the source code, looked at it clearly, and begun the slow, patient work of rewriting what no longer serves you. This is not a one-time event. It is not an arrival. Awakening is not a door you walk through and then stand on the other side of, finally finished. It is more like a direction you choose and keep choosing over and over, often in moments when the old patterns are pulling you back with tremendous force. It is an orientation, not an achievement. And that distinction matters deeply because it means the person who is truly awake is not the person who has everything figured out. It is the person who has committed to seeing clearly, even when seeing clearly is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable. There is a quality that comes with this orientation that is hard to fake and impossible to manufacture. You have met people who have it. You know it when you are near it. There is a solidity to them that is not rigidity, a calm that is not distance, a warmth that does not feel performed. They are not trying to seem wise or spiritual or evolved. Those are all things people do when they are still trying to look awake, rather than actually being it. The person who is truly doing this work has stopped needing to perform it. The work has simply become the life. The inward gaze has become as natural as breathing, and what it produces, that particular quality of presence, of steadiness, of genuine attention, is felt by everyone around them, whether those people can name what they are feeling or not. That is what it means to be truly awake, not to have arrived somewhere final, but to have begun something real, and to keep beginning it every day, in every quiet moment when the pull toward unconsciousness is strong, and the easier path is to simply stop looking inward and go back to sleep. The inner world is always broadcasting. Think of yourself as a signal. Not a signal you control with words or conscious behavior. Not something you manage with the right tone of voice or the right expression on your face. A signal that is always transmitting from your deepest assumptions about life, about people, about yourself, from the beliefs you formed before you had language to describe them, from the experiences that shaped you before you were old enough to put them in context, from every conclusion you have ever drawn, consciously or not, about whether the world is safe, whether people are trustworthy, whether you are enough, whether love is conditional, whether you are fundamentally alone in the core of who you are. That signal goes out constantly in all directions. If you believe deep down that people cannot be trusted not as a thought you think, but as a truth you feel, a truth written into the way your body holds itself when someone moves too close, that signal goes out. And people pick it up without knowing they are picking it up. They feel a subtle guardedness around you. They keep a small distance they cannot explain. They smile. They are polite. But there is an invisible wall, and neither of you can quite say where it came from or why it is there. That is not their imagination. That is not some failure on their part. That is the signal you are transmitting, landing exactly where signals land, in the wordless, preconscious reading that human beings do of one another constantly. And if you believe deep down that you are worthy, not in a way you are trying to convince yourself of, not as an affirmation you repeat, but as something you have actually arrived at through the difficult work of meeting yourself honestly, that signal goes out too. People relax around you. They open up. They say things they did not expect to say. They leave the conversation feeling slightly more alive than they did before, and they often cannot explain why. That is not coincidence. That is consciousness transmitting. You have felt this from other people many times. You have walked into a room where someone's energy was heavy before they said a word. You felt the tightness, the weight, the unnamed something that made your own body shift into a more guarded position. You did not need information. You did not need an explanation. You simply received the transmission and your system responded to it automatically. You have also been around people who made you feel calm, seen, safe again, before they said anything particularly meaningful, before they did anything you could point to and say, That is why. The ease was simply present. The openness was simply there. And you moved toward it like a plant toward light, because something in you recognized something in them. And that recognition happened faster and deeper than thought. This is the inner world broadcasting. This is consciousness transmitting its actual contents, not its performed contents. And this distinction is everything, because most of what we do in social life is perform. We perform confidence when we are afraid. We perform calm when we are churning. We perform warmth when we are actually closed. And we perform distance when we are actually desperate to be seen. None of that performance is wrong or shameful. It is simply human. And most of it happens automatically, as a kind of protection, as the masks we discussed earlier doing their job of keeping us safe. But the performance and the actual transmission are two different things, and the people around us receive both. Consciously, they receive the performance. Below consciousness, they receive the transmission. And the two are often in conflict, and that conflict is what makes so many interactions feel slightly off, slightly effortful, slightly like you are both speaking and yet not quite connecting. An awakened soul has learned to tend to what they broadcast, not to perform positivity, not to paste a layer of force peace over a roiling interior, not to pretend that the difficult emotions do not exist or that the fears are not real. That would just be a more sophisticated performance. The work is actual cultivation, the actual unglamorous, daily practice of meeting the internal state honestly, sitting with it, understanding it, and gradually, not instantly, not dramatically shifting it at the root rather than at the surface. This takes time. It takes patience with yourself that is almost counterintuitive in its gentleness, because we are so trained to push, to fix, to achieve, to get somewhere. But the internal world does not respond to that kind of force. It responds to attention. It responds to honesty. It responds to the willingness to see what is actually there, without immediately trying to change it or run from it or explain it away. When you tend to your internal world this way, when you take responsibility for what you are actually transmitting, not just what you intend to transmit, the effects on every relationship in your life are profound. Not because you have become some kind of perfected being radiating only light, but because there is now coherence between what you carry and what you offer. The performance and the transmission begin to align. And when they align, something extraordinary happens. Trust becomes possible in a way it was not before. Not the kind of trust that is negotiated or earned through track records. The immediate, wordless trust that two people can feel in the first minutes of knowing each other, when something in each of them says, "This is a real person. This is someone who is actually here." That coherence, that alignment between the inner signal and the outer expression, is what makes an awakened person's presence feel so distinctly different from the average encounter. It is not that they are better people in some moral sense. It is that they are no longer split. The person they show you and the person they actually are have been brought into closer relationship with each other. And to meet someone like that, when you yourself have done the same work, is to meet them in a depth of reality that most human interaction never touches. Recognition without words. When two people who have done this inner work enter the same space, something interesting happens almost immediately. There is recognition, not the kind of recognition that comes from shared history, from having met before, from belonging to the same social world or professional circle, not nostalgia, not the warm comfort of familiarity, something different from all of that. Something that feels, if you try to name it, like being seen. Like two people who have both been doing something very particular in private, finally encountering someone else who has been doing it too. And the shared understanding of what that something costs and what it opens, moving between them before either of them has said a word about it. It is like two musicians who have spent years practicing alone suddenly playing together for the first time. They do not need to explain their technique to each other. They do not need to teach each other the scales, to establish the vocabulary, to build the common language from the ground up the way you have to do with someone who has not been on this particular kind of journey. They simply begin, and it works. And both of them feel at this ease that should not be so easy. This flow that has no business being so immediate. Because normally ease like this takes years to build. Normally this level of comfort in communication requires a long history of shared experience, of showing each other who you are piece by careful piece, of building trust slowly and cautiously, because trust is fragile, and we have all learned that the hard way. But this is different. This ease is already present before the history exists, because the work that usually produces ease after years has already been done separately inside each of them. They arrive at the first meeting already carrying what others only arrive at much later, if they arrive at all. This recognition is not the ego saying, finally, someone like me. That is something else, something smaller, something that is still about comparison and category and identity. The ego loves to find its reflection in others because it confirms that what it believes about itself is real. That particular recognition is warm, but it is also subtly self-congratulatory, subtly closed, subtly more about confirmation than connection. What happens between two genuinely awake people is quieter than that. It happens below thought. It happens in the same wordless register where the inner signal is transmitted and received. Two people, both tuned to a certain depth, both committed to honesty within themselves, sense each other the way the water in two cups senses it is the same water when the cups are finally placed side by side. There is no fanfare. There is simply a settling, a recognition not of similarity but of resonance. And from that resonance, conversation becomes possible at a level that is rarely accessible between people who have not done this work. Not because awakened people are smarter or more interesting or more articulate, though they may be all of those things, but because the usual obstacles to real conversation are simply less present. The performance is less thick, the guardedness is quieter, the need to manage impressions, to protect the image, to control how one is perceived, all of that is still human, still there in some form, because none of us are beyond our humanity, but it is thinner. The membrane between the inner world and the outer expression is more permeable, and so things can pass through it more freely. Real things, uncertain things, true things that have no neat resolution, the kind of things that most conversations never reach, because both people are too busy managing the surface to go anywhere near the depth. There is also something that happens in the silences between two people like this that does not happen in ordinary conversation. In most exchanges, silence is uncomfortable. It creates pressure. Someone moves to fill it, to break it, to cover it with sound, because the sound feels safer than the stillness. But between two people who have both learned to sit with themselves in silence, who have both developed some relationship with their own interior that does not require constant noise to be bearable, silence becomes something else. It becomes a space where something continues, where the conversation does not pause so much as deepen, where what could not be said in words is somehow said anyway, and both people receive it, and neither of them needs to name what just passed between them. This is what makes these encounters so rare and so nourishing, and also why they can feel slightly disorienting at first. We are so conditioned to the ordinary transaction of social life, the surface exchange, the pleasant friction, the careful navigation of impressions, that when something genuinely opens presents itself, there is a moment of adjustment, a moment of, is this real? Are we actually doing this? And then, if both people stay with it rather than retreating into habit, something settles. The adjustment completes. And what remains is simply two people in a room actually meeting each other. Not the versions they show the world. Not the edited, managed, curated selves. The actual people with all their unfinished edges and hard-won steadiness and genuine uncertainty present to each other in a way that most human beings spend their whole lives hoping for and very rarely find. That is the meeting of two awakened souls. Not a mystical event, not a fairy tale. Just two people who have done the difficult, private, ongoing work of knowing themselves, finally in the same room, and recognizing in each other that the work has been done. And from that recognition, everything that follows is built on something real. Why reality actually shifts here is where we go deeper, because this is the part that most people resist. Not because they cannot understand it intellectually, the idea is not complicated, but because if you truly accept it, if you let it land all the way down into the place where your actual operating assumptions live, it changes everything. And change, even change we say we want, is something the mind resists with remarkable creativity. So it is easier to hold this idea at a comfortable distance, to nod at it, to say, yes, I believe that, while continuing to live as though reality is something that simply happens to you from the outside, as though you are a receiver and not also a transmitter, a witness, and not also a participant in the creation of what you witness. When you hold a belief or an assumption about life, you are not passively watching reality unfold in front of you. You are actively shaping it. Not in the way of fantasy, not in the way of wishful thinking, where you simply want something hard enough and the universe delivers it wrapped and waiting. That is not what this means, and conflating the two is one of the ways people dismiss this idea before they have truly sat with it. What it means is more precise and more verifiable than fantasy. Your assumptions determine what you notice. They determine what your attention moves toward and what it slides past as if it were not there. They determine what you pursue and what you do not even recognize as a possibility worth pursuing. They determine what you accept as normal, what you tolerate as inevitable, what you walk away from because your inner architecture simply has no room for it yet. A person who believes they are fundamentally unworthy of deep love will, without any conscious intention, create exactly the conditions that confirm this belief. They will choose partners who are unavailable. They will push away those who get too close. They will interpret genuine care as performance, genuine affection as something that must have conditions underneath it. Because the belief that unconditional love exists for them is simply not inside the architecture of what they hold to be true. And none of this is stupidity. None of this is weakness. It is the natural, almost mechanical consequence of allowing unconscious beliefs to function as the operating system of a life. The belief generates the behavior. The behavior generates the result. The result confirms the belief. And the loop continues seamlessly, invisibly, until something interrupts it, usually pain. Usually the specific pain of seeing the pattern repeat one too many times, and finally being willing to ask, why does this keep happening? Every awakened person understands this at some level. They have done enough inner work to know that their internal state is not just a response to life. It is a creative force within life. They have seen it in themselves, the way a shift inside preceded a shift outside. The way a decision made at the level of belief, not willpower, not strategy, but actual belief, changed what became possible for them. They have lived the experience of the outer world responding to the inner world, and they cannot unknow it. It has become part of their foundational understanding of how reality actually functions. Now imagine two people who both carry this understanding, not as theory, as lived knowledge. Two people who are both actively, daily, doing the work of tending to what they hold inside. When they meet, they are not just exchanging words. They are not having a conversation in the ordinary sense of two people trading information and opinion. They are two creative forces in the same space, and forces compound. This is not mysticism. This is what happens whenever two things operating at the same frequency come into contact. They amplify each other. They create something larger than either could create separately, not by addition, but by something closer to multiplication. Because the dynamic between them generates possibilities that did not exist in either person alone. Where one awakened person creates a field of possibility around them, a quality of openness, of genuine presence, of willingness to go where the truth leads, rather than where comfort points, two of them in the same space create something larger. The conversation goes somewhere that neither person could have taken it alone. Not because they are smarter together, though that may be true, but because the field between them supports a different quality of thinking, a different quality of honesty, a different quality of risk. In ordinary conversation, we manage ourselves constantly. We edit before we speak. We monitor the other person's response and adjust accordingly. We protect ourselves from being too exposed, too wrong, too uncertain in front of someone who might use that uncertainty against us. But when the person across from you is also committed to honesty, when you can sense that they are not waiting to judge you, but genuinely interested in what is true, the editing falls away. And what comes out when the editing falls away is often the most interesting, most alive, most real thinking either person has ever done on that subject. The ideas that emerge in these conversations are not simply the sum of two minds. They are something that was made possible by the specific meeting of two people at a specific level of inner development, in a specific moment with a specific quality of presence between them. You cannot manufacture this. You cannot produce it by putting two intelligent people in a room together, because intelligence is not the variable. The variable is depth. The variable is how far each person has gone inside themselves, how much of their own unconscious machinery they have examined and understood, how willing they are to let what is true be more important than what is comfortable. This is why certain conversations change you, not because of what was said. You often cannot even remember exactly what was said, but you remember that something shifted. You remember that you left that conversation seeing something you could not see before, carrying something you did not carry before, feeling somehow larger or clearer or more grounded in a way you cannot fully account for. That is not the content of the conversation working on you. That is the field that existed between two people who were both genuinely present, both genuinely honest, both genuinely awake, doing something that conversation alone cannot do. The words were the surface, the field was the substance, and the field was created not by what either person said, but by what each person carried, what each person had cultivated inside over the long and often difficult time before they walked into that room and sat across from each other. Reality shifts in these encounters because reality is always, at every moment, being participated in by the people who move through it. And when the participants are conscious, truly conscious, not as an idea, but as a practice, not as a self-description, but as an orientation they return to again and again, what they participate in together is something the world needs more of and very rarely gets. Two people making something real. Two people thinking at the level where thinking actually changes things. Not performing wisdom at each other, not comparing spiritual achievements. Just two human beings, both committed to seeing clearly, creating between them a quality of reality that neither could have made alone. The mirror that doesn't lie, one of the hardest truths about inner work is that you cannot fully see yourself alone. This is not a failure of effort or a limitation of intelligence. It is simply the nature of consciousness, the nature of the self, the way that what we are is always partly invisible to us from the inside. The way a fish cannot see the water it swims in, not because the fish is not paying attention, but because the water is the medium of its perception, not the object of it. We are all, in some foundational way, surrounded by our own assumptions like water, breathing them in and out, moving through them in every direction, so accustomed to their presence that we have long since stopped experiencing them as a presence at all. They are just the way things are. They are just reality. You can sit in silence for years. You can journal every morning, meditate every evening, build a rich and serious practice of self-reflection that many people would admire. And you will make real progress, genuine, meaningful, life-altering progress. There is no argument to be made against any of that work. It matters. It changes things. It is absolutely worth doing and worth continuing for as long as you live. But there are parts of you that simply will not become visible through solitary practice alone, because they only exist or only become visible in relationship. They are the parts that are triggered by another person's presence. They are the parts that lie specifically in the space between you and someone else, that arise only in the friction or the warmth or the specific dynamic that another human being creates in you. You cannot find those parts in your journal. You cannot find them on the cushion. They are waiting for you in relationship, and they will not show themselves any other way. When you meet someone who is also awake, genuinely awake, not performing awakening, they become a mirror. But this is not the kind of mirror most of us are used to. Most of the mirrors in our lives are distorted in one direction or another. There are the mirrors that tell you what you want to hear. The people who love you or need you or fear your reaction enough that they soften every reflection, round every edge, make you look a little better than you are, not out of cruelty, but out of kindness or conflict avoidance, or their own discomfort with your discomfort. Those mirrors feel good in the short term. They feel validating and warm, but they are not particularly useful if you are trying to see clearly, because they are showing you a version of yourself shaped by the other person's emotional needs, rather than by the truth of who you are. And then there are the other kind of mirrors, the ones that distort in the opposite direction. The people whose own unhealed pain causes them to project onto you, to see in you the things they cannot bear to see in themselves, to offer criticism or judgment that is not really about you at all, but about them, about their own unexamined interior, their own shadows being cast outward and landing on the closest available surface. These reflections can sting badly enough that we take them seriously, that we internalize them, that we carry them for years. But they are also not true reflections. They are someone else's story, dressed up as feedback about you. A truly awakened person offers neither of these. They hold the mirror steady in a way that most of us have almost never experienced, which is why being in the presence of that steadiness can feel so unusual at first, so almost disorienting in its clarity. They see the light in you, and they reflect it back. Not as flattery, not as the kind of empty affirmation that slides off because you know it is not quite earned, but as a genuine recognition that lands differently, that reaches something in you that needed to be seen and has not been seen clearly before. There is a particular quality of being truly recognized, not for what you do or what you achieve or what you project, but for what you actually are underneath all of that. And when it happens, when someone reflects it back without agenda, without wanting anything from it. The experience is almost startling because it is so rare. Because most of us have been seen partially, conditionally, through the filters of other people's needs and assumptions. To be seen without those filters is to realize, sometimes for the first time, what it actually feels like. But the awakened mirror also reflects the unresolved corners. It cannot help it. When two honest people sit together in genuine presence, the unfinished parts do not stay hidden the way they can in more guarded interactions. They surface, not because the other person is trying to expose you, not because they are looking for your flaws or seeking the power that comes from knowing someone's vulnerabilities, but simply because the quality of honesty in the space makes hiding effortful in a way it usually is not. The defenses that function automatically in ordinary interaction require more energy to maintain when the person across from you is not playing the same game of managed surfaces. And when the defense drops, even slightly, what was underneath it becomes briefly visible to you and to them. This is not comfortable. It is important to say that plainly. The experience of being genuinely mirrored, including the parts that are unresolved, the parts you are not proud of, the parts you have been very carefully not looking at directly, is not comfortable. Even when the mirroring is done with complete compassion, with no judgment, with no agenda beyond honesty, it can bring up shame. It can bring up the old reflexive desire to deflect or explain or minimize. These are natural responses. They are the self-protection instinct doing what it was built to do. But in the presence of someone who is not judging, who is simply holding the mirror steady and waiting without pressure, something else also becomes possible. The willingness to look, the willingness to stay with what the mirror is showing rather than immediately moving to cover it or fix it or perform remorse about it. Just to look, just to see, and in the seeing to understand something that no amount of solitary reflection had managed to surface. This is the gift that cannot be bought, cannot be scheduled, cannot be produced on demand. It requires two people, both willing, both honest, both safe enough within themselves that they do not need to use each other's vulnerabilities for leverage. When those conditions are met, when that particular quality of presence exists between two people, the work that becomes possible is unlike anything available through any solitary practice, because you are finally seeing yourself from the outside, from an outside that is also honest, also clear, also genuinely interested in your wholeness rather than your performance. And in that seeing, something often releases that has been held for a very long time, waiting for exactly this. Not someone to fix it, not someone to fix it, not someone to judge it, but someone simply willing to witness it without flinching. That witnessing, offered freely and received with courage, is one of the most profound things two human beings can offer each other. And it only becomes possible when both of them have done enough of their own work to be present for it. Here is the thing that I want you to sit with. You cannot find an awakened soul to meet if you are not awake yourself, not because they don't exist, but because you would not recognize them, because the frequency you are on determines what you can receive. The work you do on yourself, the honesty, the stillness, the willingness to see your patterns and do something about them, that is not just self-improvement. It is tuning. It is preparation. Every time you choose to go inward instead of outward, every time you choose truth instead of comfort, every time you sit with your discomfort instead of running from it, you are tuning yourself to a frequency that can finally receive what it has been reaching for. The meeting of two awakened souls doesn't begin when they walk into the same room. It begins long before. It begins the moment each of them decided to stop performing and start becoming. The encounter is simply the moment that work becomes visible. So let's come back to where we started. Something happens when two people who have done the real inner work finally meet each other. Now you know what that something is. It is the meeting of two creative forces who have learned to take responsibility for what they carry. It is the encounter of two inner worlds that have been shaped with intention, with honesty, with care. And when those worlds touch, they do not cancel each other out. They amplify. They reveal. They create something that neither person could have made alone. And reality shifts not because something external changed, but because two internal worlds aligned, even briefly, at a level that most people never reach together. Do not wait for this kind of meeting to arrive before you begin the work. The work is what makes the meeting possible. And the work begins in the only place it has ever been available to you, right here, right now, inside. If this opens something in you, subscribe, because what comes next goes even deeper.